We call this meeting to order. This is a Livingston Parish Ordinance Committee meeting. Today is Tuesday, May 3rd, 2022. It's a few minutes after 6 p.m. Roll call.
Mr. Girlinghouse, Mr. Mack,
Here.
Mr. Talbert,
Here.
Mr. Ard.
Here. All right, appreciate that. Just want to say a few things before we get started tonight. I know I've seen a lot of you here, and I just want to let you know how much we appreciate you all coming faithfully to try to help us work through these ordinances so that we can develop Livingston Parish so that it, brings forth the best quality of life for all of us that live in Livingston Parish. If you have something that you would like to speak on, you're certainly welcome to do so. All you have to do is raise your hand in orderly fashion, and we'll try to call upon you. You can come to the podium. Let's make sure that we turn the mic on so that you can be heard over the audio system. And just kind of announce your name and your address. And then, speak about, 2 to 3 minutes on your topic. And try not to repeat yourself or the person that went before you so that we can kind of get through this. I'd love to be out of here for like 7:30 or so. We can continue on. If we don't get everything done tonight that we had planned to get done, we can continue on, next Tuesday until we get all our goals accomplished. So that being said, let's just stand real quick for a word of prayer. I'll pray real quick, be short and sweet, and we'll get started. Dear God in heaven, we thank you for this beautiful day, Father, and we just thank you for allowing us to gather here safely so that we could work together to better our parish, Father. Just help us, give us the wisdom and knowledge and courage to do the right thing, and just help us to be the people that you'd have us to be, Father. Forgive us for our sins. Thank you for everything in life. Amen. All right. So, old business.
We don't have any.
Is there any old business? No old business. All right. New business. Okay, so we're going to talk about, first on the list is 4A, detention basin requirements. Tracy Girlinghouse is kind of authoring or kind of leading this modification or addition to this ordinance, and so we kind of want to just talk about that. Now this is really about the developments and making sure that the retention ponds within the developments can be maintained such that they operate according to design, okay? And so he's got some requirements on here. I know Gary and Jeff are very familiar with that. Maybe we could talk a little bit more about it. Would love for some of y'all. This is real important because as you purchase property and live within these developments, you've got your property. Some of it's going to back up to a retention pond. So you're going to want to listen up and kind of understand these requirements and see if you feel like this is what's best for, that living inside that subdivision. So I'm going to read through them unless somebody else feels like they could. Okay, so this is section 125-25. Okay, this is detention basin. Whenever a detention basin is utilized by the operator, developer, engineer to minimize downstream flooding, the design shall address at a minimum the following. And so what he's looking for here is an adequate land must be reserved for maintenance of the detention pond, right? They've had trouble in the past when there was no adequate access to be able to maintain, the gravity drainage district or the parish or whosoever's in charge of maintaining that land, being able to go in there and actually maintain that retention pond if it needed maintenance. We're talking about here, the pond shall have at least a 20-foot servitude around the perimeter of the pond. Now keep in mind that a servitude wouldn't be able to have any type of fence or any type of permanent structure within that servitude, so that would be open so that you could, do maintenance around the pond. Pond shall have a 20-foot gated servitude for access to the detention pond basin for, access and maintenance of the pond itself, right? So you'd want to not surround the pond with private property such that no one would have access to the detention pond. You would want to have a servitude to get to the pond, and then you would also have the 20-foot, I guess you could say, servitude around the pond. And then in addition to that, the 20-foot gated servitude for access and maintenance of the pond shall have a crushed concrete or gravel base. We could talk about this as a team and see what y'all feel like is best, but I mean, the thought process there is just to have some type of adequate access so that, equipment that was needed to get in there and maintain that pond, you could, you're not getting stuck and tearing up everything and having a lot of trouble getting in and out of where you need to perform your maintenance. So at this time, is anybody, you've heard the proposed changes, so does anybody have anything they would like to talk about, or maybe they have some input to talk about maintaining these detention ponds such that anybody, just raise your hand. It would be best if raise your hand. We're going to get you. I like to call upon everybody. So just try not to repeat though. And so the lady in the back, would start off with her. Yeah, and you got to turn that mic. Oh, thank you so much. It should there you go. And just lean into it when you talk if you can.
My name is Tracy Milling. I live at 9450 Hill and Hood Road.
All right.
Did not plan on speaking tonight, but I have a question.
Okay.
For that detention, is it detention or detention and overflow ponds?
Some in the audience may know more, some up here may know more, but my thought would be it's basically both. It's how it operates, right? It releases a certain amount of discharge per design so that it retains the stormwater, that it was designed to retain. So basically, you're going to have your, what I call, we're going to call them overflow pipes at certain stages, and it's going to release as it's designed to release, so that's it's all of that process.
Okay, and is there, I'm trying to be educated.
Yes, ma'am.
So is there a place that I can find out what that's supposed to be? Because I have current detention ponds that are going opposite from the Amite River across to other property that is considered wetlands, and it situations last spring and summer, my daughter and son-in-law who live next door, there was so much water coming across from other subdivisions that they had a choice to, and we do not have city sewer or any sewer, it's, treatment plant, personal. They had a choice of either showering or flushing their toilets for 48 hours.
I appreciate you coming up in here and talking about that. You triggered a thought.
So I just wanted to ask for these changes, was it going to be for
I'm going to
detention
attempt to
or-
answer that, and then I'm going to leave it up to some others to maybe help me out if if they feel like they might be able to do a better job.
Thank you.
Okay, so my thought on that is we have a big problem in Livingston Parish. The big problem is, in my opinion, is that the detention ponds currently are maintained by the property owners, right? It's in the ordinance that the detention ponds are maintained by the property owners, right? It's my thought that we should hold someone accountable, such as a gravity drainage district or the Department of Public Works of Livingston Parish, and to maintain those. Now, in saying that, you're going to have to compensate whatever responsible party, provide them some resources and some funding so that they're able to do that, so that those detention ponds operate
Yeah, they're not detention.
as designed, because they're not right now. And so we'll have to talk more about that in the future to kind of fix some of the current problems we have in Livingston Parish. But with a homeowners association, some of them fall apart. Some of them do try to operate, as they're supposed to, but and my thought is that there's an issue with their ability and know-how and funding to actually maintain those properly. So I think that we need to put that back on the gravity drainage districts, and then we need to compensate the gravity drainage districts so that those detention ponds can be maintained. Part of doing that is moving forward with Tracy's ordinance here to establish a method so that they can get in and maintain those. We'll have to kind of go back and walk all the way through that.
They have a method to get in, and it will hold water.
Yeah.
They can be completely full. In 45 minutes, they will be completely empty. Their detention, they do not retain water at all.
Right. So if you don't maintain those as designed, then they don't operate as they designed, and therefore they don't really do the job they're intended to do, and therefore it's a big problem. It causes a
were
lot of
like
flooding
this
problems. So
before
we're going to
they-
be looking at that in the future also, but this right here is just about making sure that we establish access,
Okay.
but
And
yeah.
we had tried to do it before they built any houses. We had tried to address it unofficially, just,
Mm-hmm.
putting the word out, and we got nowhere. So with this coming up, I just wanted to get more educated.
Yep,
Thank you.
I appreciate you asking that, and I think that we should probably take an action. I don't know, I can't promise you it's gonna be next Tuesday or even the next Tuesday, but we probably should take an action to kind of talk, are we already have that on the list to talk about, like far as like maybe impact fees or maybe a collection of funding within that development, a taxing district or something? I don't know, I think we need to talk about that in some way, shape, or
We gotta
form,
go to
but
the legislature before we can do that.
we gotta talk through that.
I
but-
appreciate it. Thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am. Come on up. Just real quick, don't forget to state your name and address. I know you will. Appreciate you.
My name is Scott Lobel, 18052 Louisiana Highway 444. That was one of the quick questions that I'd had too, was basically who maintains it? Is it the developer, HOA, drainage district? Sounds like hopefully this ordinance will put some teeth in there, or that's what's being discussed, that it would be the,
Well, the truth
Drainage
is this
districts.
ordinance right here just basically establishes servitudes and access. Currently, the ordinance, I'm gonna let you talk, Gary. So currently, the ordinance says that the private property owners maintain it, right? Which you have, in my opinion, when you have 200 or 300 property owners, sometimes it's hard to get everybody on the same page and put forth enough funding and game plan to actually maintain that, so that needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed as soon as possible. We're working on that, but I don't really have an answer for you right now.
Yeah, and
other
that's
than
the point that
it's
I'm trying to make.
responsibility of the private property
it
owners.
sounds like if it's the private property owners or the HOA, then maybe some type of ordinance would be drafted that would at least be able to effectively police that, or put the responsibility to a drainage district. And then the question becomes, what if the drainage district is not funded? And, I realize some of that would be hard to police in that nature. Some other things that I've seen in the past before, I saw where detention ponds have come up for sheriff's sale. This is probably over 10 years ago. I was like Lakes of Belterre or something. When I'm looking through the sheriff's sale, I see these big tracts come up for sheriff's sale, and you go and you look at it, and it winds up being a detention pond that, so, either the HOA or the developer or whoever, they quit paying the taxes on it. And then if, as an individual property owner, you can go buy it, and it's encumbered by some servitudes and a bunch of things that you can do, or that you can't do with it. But what effectively stops that new person or any person in the subdivision for saying, well, man, I don't like the way that this detention pond is, the water surface is real low. A pond is always prettier when the water's up to the top banks, and then they go and start monkeying with the outfall and things like that. So hopefully, as you guys are looking into this and coming up with a solution, that those are the sort of things we taking into account and trying to address. Appreciate your time.
Appreciate that, Gary. You might want to speak on this, but my thought is as that ordinance that Gary put out about the as-built and everything, all of that would be documented on paper moving forward, and that would be something that we could kind of go back and use as a reference. If it got modified, somebody complained that it was modified, you could go back, you could look at that documentation, and then if it was modified, then you could go back and fix it if you knew who did it, maybe hold them accountable and that type of stuff. But yeah, you're right, Gary. You want to say something?
We've addressed this, or we've talked about it, and what we found is that we can create some taxing districts within subdivisions to maintain these detention ponds. However, we've got to go before the legislature, and when we realized what we need to do, it was too late to pre-file local bills for the last session. So we do know that before the next pre-filing date, we've got to address requesting that we create taxing districts. And what we found in a lot of other areas is that certain things that need to be maintained, you get the developer on the front end to create a taxing district, to put a fee on those people that buy in it for the maintenance of that particular deal. We talked once originally about an impact fee, which is a one-time fee, but it's a recurring expense, so it didn't work. So we know that we've got to get this ordinance straight, a couple things, so we can go to the legislature or do the pre-filing in the fall, so that the spring of 2023 we can pass legislation that allows Livingston Parish to create taxing districts and subdivisions, so that we could do maintenance of like retention ponds, so to speak. So we've talked about it. We know we've got a timeline to get some stuff done, but that's where we are on the funding of the maintenance on retention ponds.
Anybody else would like to speak on this particular topic or such? Go ahead. Appreciate you. Come on up.
Billy Taylor, 28339 Frost Road, Livingston. So yeah, no matter who's going to end up maintaining it, I think the first step's access, which I'll have here, but want to clarify one thing, the word gated in there. Is your thought if we have a 20-foot strip between two lots that goes back 150 feet, is the gate at the front? Or are we supposed to put like a fence along the side as well?
That's a great question. I'm going to be honest with you as possible. Tracy's not here. I don't really see where it needs to be gated, but he put that in there. He felt like that was necessary. We could talk through that and see if the group felt that way. I'm not quite sure what the purpose of the gate is, other than just to keep other people from like tearing up the servitude, maybe.
Okay,
but
I agree with that. I was just going to make a comment. In other places, they've tried to do the same thing with a fence, and you end up with a small alleyway that nobody can maintain as far as cutting the grass, and usually a lot of them.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I was wondering.
Bill-
Clarify that.
off that he wants a gate.
Billy, I think, look, from my point of view, gate ought to be at the front. Just put a gate at the front, and people's property is the side of the servitude. Their actual property actually is gonna extend into that servitude, the people that don't live on both sides. But what you don't want is a road that's gonna tempt somebody to go right around that pond. And so ultimately, I think the purpose, when I read it, what I believed is that a gate would be at the front, and then, the drainage district could access through that gate, that pond, but that, being a servitude, those people's lots are actually gonna meet, kind of center of that road, if I'm not mistaken, and that's,
Yeah, we can, unless it's like a gated, like a servitude's part of the tract in the back. It
Well,
can
and
be
then-
different.
and you gotta
but
figure out-
I agree with you about gating in the front, and I just didn't want to create something that nobody can maintain.
that we end up with an alleyway and nobody, the guy on the right can't get it, the guy on the left can't get it, and then the sewer district's gotta come in, or the gravity drain district's gotta come in and cut that grass just to maintain the appearance of subdivision. I don't think that's what the intent was. Bill, I do have a question for you, and I'm glad you came up. The only issue I see with this is in when this implementation comes in. For example, if I've made a submittal on a subdivision that's got 4 or 5 filings, and I did the drainage impact study with one pond, then it's hard to go back and redesign that pond. So my question is, when the submittal, from this point forward, on submittal of, after it's ratified, on submittal of ponds, meaning that, for example, Whispering Springs, as an example, might have 3 or 4 ponds in that particular subdivision. So everything that's associated with the pond that's already been designed and submitted, it would be hard to go back and retro, this deal. But any ponds that have not been submitted, then you would expect this standard to apply. So we do need to put some wording in there to address that, because you can't, after you've done a preliminary design on 4 or 5 filings and submitted it, and then it's been accepted, you can't go retro design, you can't go back and then add a servitude when the pond might originally not been designed like that. Typically, they have a servitude that runs through the middle of them, and people's backyard back up to the edge of them. So that's the only thing I see, is that there needs to be some notation in here as to when those, like on all new submittals on all retention ponds, it would not be an issue. But if a pond has already been designed and it's being utilized for additional filings, then it would be hard to come back in and make this ordinance apply. This changed the ordinance. So there needs to be some wording in there about when this thing would apply to an existing retention pond, or if it does apply to some existing retention pond. You understand, you know how some subdivisions, that you draw one retention pond and everything goes to it, and then others, depending on the logistics or the size of the subdivision, you might have multiple retention ponds. That's the only concern I have in the implementation of this ordinance.
Yeah, I agree, and I agree it's better to talk about it and get it in writing so it's clear for everybody involved, including the parish. So.
Appreciate that point. That's a very, very good point there, Gary. I got a question for you, Billy, since you're standing there.
You made me quit coming and ask questions.
What was the intent years ago, how to maintain these? How was the homeowners and private property owners? Any idea on how that was
I can't
planned?
speak for past parish councils, but just from what I've heard, we've always had servitudes around ponds and 2 ponds, and it may not be exactly 20 feet. Sometimes it was 12, and then it grew to 15. Now it's growing to 20. Let them get big machines back there and fix it. But I think just probably that the parish council, police, jury back in the day didn't have the funding to go maintain a lot of them. So they had homeowner association paying fees, and it's great in theory, and that's what was happening. But then you get people quit paying fees. So basically it's the same thing you're talking about with doing a taxing district, except that'll be a legal way to collect the fees to maintain.
Well, let me ask you this. So, but the servitudes, as far as servitudes and right of way and access to maintain, was that always?
To my knowledge, it has been. We've always
Most of the developments that you're familiar with, had some type of servitude?
A certain width so they can get a piece of machinery around it. So it's always been there since I've known it.
Look, I know for a fact that there's one development in my subdivision, in my district, that was designed as, they're selling lakefront property. I mean, let's just face it, retention ponds were lakefront property. They got more for the lots that were on the ponds. So I think the thing has evolved. I think initially they saw a way to, when this ordinance was originally introduced, because I talked to some developers from back in the day, that's like, we created a way to hold water, but we basically created, waterfront lots that drew more money. And then typically, back in the day when they developed these subdivisions, the developer controlled the HOA for a long time till he was out. And so it wasn't an issue, initially through the in the thought process when this original ordinance was written. And then when the developer leaves and turns the HOA over to the subdivision is typically sometimes when you end up with some problems that you have a group that doesn't agree with what the other group does. And so consequently, I'm not going to pay, or, and then once a violation occurs to the ordinance, or the what term am I looking for? The restrictions, once there's a violation of the restrictions and it goes unanswered, then all the restrictions are null and void at that point in time. And so, I think there was a lot of, when the developers were policing as they were developing subdivisions and building houses out, the HOAs were run different than when they were turned over, because that developer, when he was controlling that HOA, because he owned the majority of the lots, wanted to be sure that nothing was done to devalue the properties that he was trying to sell. Yet when he was done and turned those HOAs back over to the, the residents of the subdivision, it's like, I want to do this in my property, so I got 6 of my buddies to agree to it. Then I violate the original, restrictions, and they become null and void for everybody. And so I think that you've seen a lot of that happen, and that's kind of, the.
Okay, so just real quick, appreciate that, Gary.
Thanks.
So
We'll go with the gate.
I thank you, buddy. So help me out here. Do we want to move forward with introducing this at the next council meeting?
Tracy said he didn't have a problem with deferring it if we come up with some issues.
How many issues? Do we have
The
any
only,
issues?
the only
to
issue
me,
we've got to do is we really need some wording on when this thing triggers to it. I mean, we know it's going to trigger on a new pond. What I'm concerned is existing ponds. How do we write them out? And I think that's important. That needs to be in the deal, because you can't ask a guy to go back in and design something that's already built around.
so that we're going to get you who raised your hand. So that'll be the action, I guess, if y'all are okay with that, Lauren. We'll over the next couple of weeks, we're going to need to take a look at that and see how we're going to address existing detention ponds in this ordinance. They're not going to be retroactive, but I mean, how do you handle different filings, same pond, that type of stuff? We'll get that worked out. The fence thing, I think we all agree, the fence probably should be close to the parish road. We're good? Okay. No action needed then. We are, no vote actually, but we have some action planned. So we got somebody that would like to come up and talk about this some more.
David Watts, 22983 Highway 42. I've noticed, I don't do any work here in this parish, but I do East Baton Rouge and Ascension parishes, commercial. And I noticed these small retention ponds are starting to come up on different commercial properties. They'll dig this small retention pond, and I deem it as a dry retention pond. In fact, I'm working on one right now. Holds no water, so it has a cover, an outfall cover that goes to a ditch. Well, that cover's sized to the engineer's spec, so when you get this rain event, all this water runs to this dry retention pond that's full of cattails or whatever it may be. So, I mean, if anybody in the crowd wants to look at one, when you go across, right there in O'Neill Lane, Peterbilt sitting right there, That is a dry retention pond behind Peterbilt. It's grass in the bottom of it. So this rain event hits and it runs off to this dry retention pond. Or these little commercial developments, especially in Ascension, that we do, they'll dig this little small, it won't be no bigger than this area right here, that'll hold the water for the runoff. Is this something Livingston's looking at too? So these commercial developments are gonna have to hold their water too? Not a subdivision, a commercial development.
It's already part of commercial. I mean, if you go to Live Oak High School, it's dry retention out front, so they don't have to
Yeah.
put a fence around it. I mean, it's
Right.
designed as dry retention, so they don't put a fence. So there's one culvert at the bottom that keeps it dry.
Right,
And it's a
right.
small culvert.
Right.
Then there's another culvert staged at a different level that as the water reaches that, it can maintain the flow, the outfall rate that existed prior to the building of the school.
Right.
So there's one at the corner of Amite Church Road and Highway 16 where the Savings and Loan is right there, or the credit union. There is a retention pond, so there's the ditch on Highway 16, then inside the ditch, there's a retention pond in the same
Right.
L-shaped thing that the
Right.
parking lot drains to. That's also a dry retention. It's gonna have
Right.
one small pipe at the bottom to maintain the dry retention.
Right.
Then another level, there'll be another pipe that lets it,
Correct.
maintain.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
we've got those already in the
Yeah,
deal.
I mean, I haven't done anything in the parish here in a long time. But like the first lady spoke, she talked about a pond. So most people's eyes look at a pond always has water in it. Well, not necessarily anymore. We
Right.
deem a pond, it could be a dry retention pond. So people look out across there and don't do these things for a living and say, that hole's out there in the ground, but that is a pond.
Right.
But like, I'm working on one right now, that thing had cattails in it that deep. I mean, the commercial development sat idle, and then somebody else bought it, and we're moving on to another project. So you're gonna go and muck all them cattails out because the culvert, now it's holding water when it would initially shouldn't have held water.
So the difference on a commercial situation is it's easy for the parish to go in and tell a commercial
Right.
property owner that you need to clean your retention pond. The
Right.
issue is not, those are easy. We're not even trying to address them. We're not asking for a servitude around the top because we don't have to go in and maintain
Right, right.
on commercial type retention. This is strictly to address the subdivision things where we had HOAs and issues where if the HOA doesn't do it, what we're trying to create is a situation where the parish can go in and do it, and then,
Right.
you can just back charge HOA or the residents that, are involved within
Yeah.
that deal based on, a special assessment on their deal.
Right.
But the problem is right now, a lot of those retention ponds have a way in, which is the drainage ditch. There's a servitude from the ditch that feeds that pond, then there's a servitude to the middle of that pond, which I can sit in a boat and go around and clean the outer banks of it,
Right.
from that
Right.
boat. And then there's a servitude on the outfall.
Right.
So ultimately, the only way to get in there is to go in there with a track piece of equipment or a barge with a backhoe on it.
Right, right.
And so what we're trying to do is avoid having to own that expensive piece of equipment to get into that pond by creating a situation where we can drive a
Right.
mini excavator around there, a backhoe around there, and be able to clean what needs to be cleaned without having to go through the pond to get it done.
Well, you brought up Whispering Springs. Whispering Springs sat idle for many years, and then the guy bought it, which I worked for him initially, but he's out of business now.
Right.
So he bought it, sold it to D.R. Horton. So that back pond at there, I worked on that particular drainage structure. It was malfunctioned. We went in there and worked on it. Engineer come looked at it, yada, yada, yada. So we reconfigured that, and then you could kind of see the problems of the old way that was built, when it was built, and then it went idle. And then, well, most people, that dirt that's dug in them ponds is used to develop the subdivision. So it's a win for the subdivision, but all that dirt they displaced that goes in the subdivision, if you look at Whispering Springs, it's elevated higher than the neighbors, and I can bring up multiple things, but I was more concerned, like the dry retention. I was trying to, dry retention seems to be the way everything's going to. That's the way I see it anyway.
Right.
Well, thank y'all for y'all's time. I just want to make a comment.
So just, I appreciate that. So, I mean, is there any way we could go back and confirm that in the commercial development ordinance that there's something written that basically states that the owner, operator, developer, I guess you could say owner, maintains that retention pond? And
I mean, the other-
is it in there correctly already?
5-82, all commercial development landowners are responsible for the construction, repair, and maintenance of their drainage and fences.
So the retention part's part of the drainage. I mean, that was the deal. I mean, commercial retention ponds aren't a problem.
So I guess if they don't maintain it, you can
Yeah.
take action?
Is, should any commercial development access with or without the landowner's authorization to perform maintenance on any issue that their drainage and or fence is causing.
I mean, let me just tell you
Might
something.
want to add and then go back and recoup the cost.
Well, I mean, I don't foresee the commercials causing much problems, but I'm just trying to give a little knowledge to the crowd here. When you see you see these ponds behind these stores and all that, and they're not a pond. They don't have any water in them, but.
Dry retention created its own industry in itself. If you go, I mean, you can just, they got companies that go to Walmart's and that's what they do. They
Right.
go in and maintain their retention pond. That's what they
Right.
do. They go in, cut the grass, make sure that, spray weed killer, kill it, dig up any trees or whatever. I mean, that's their job to go in and,
Right.
and do that. They periodically, it's not a monthly type, I cut my grass at my house, but I don't know if it's annually, quarterly, I don't know how they do it. But there's a whole industry of a group of people that's what they do.
All right. Appreciate
All
you,
right,
David.
thank you.
Moving on. Anybody else real quick on that before we move on to the next one? All right, come on up, Mr. Lobel. Don't forget to state your name again.
Scott Lobel, 18052 Louisiana Highway 444. To speak real quick kind of to what he's talking about, it seems like it would make sense from a good responsible engineering perspective to tie it to some acreage, because there are, obviously a Walmart or a high school as big as the one that you're talking about, a detention pond is warranted. But whenever you're looking at something that's an acre or less, and he provided an example and I'll provide another one, there's a pediatric orthopedic over on Airline Highway, and they have a little dry detention pond, and it isn't very much, and it's less than an acre or whatever. So things like that, I don't think that the runoff and the time of concentration and what you're doing, you're basically, stopping a little flash flood event that's going to get on down the way anyway. So those smaller developments that, from a commercial perspective, there probably should be a little leeway on that. And I think there's enough engineers around here that could get together and give some good advice on some of that stuff. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Anybody else? Okay, moving on to the next agenda item. This here is non-permanent structures like snowball stands, submittal requirements. This Mr. Gary Talbert's bringing this forward.
I had to grant I asked council to grant a waiver on a traffic study and a drainage impact study on a snowball stand in Watson. And it seems to me that we probably should write in this ordinance that seasonal non-permanent structures less than an acre, we should waive the traffic study and the drainage impact study on the front end. And then, and by non-permanent, it's gonna be on piers, it's not gonna be sitting on a slab. Seasonal's pretty definitive. I mean, it's something that's, not gonna be open all the time. Because basically, that individual took that piece of land and went to planning and said, I wanna put a snowball stand here, and planning gave them a list of things they need to do. And they contacted 2 different civil engineers, and the price tag was $10,000 to, do all the stuff that needed to be done to require them to place a snowball stand on a piece of property that wasn't gonna be there forever anyway, or wasn't gonna permanently be attached. So it just seems to me that seasonal non-permanent structures on pieces of property less than an acre, we should waive the traffic and drainage impact study. And if everybody's in agreement with that, I'm gonna ask Ms. White to try to address that before the next ordinance committee meeting, so she can have that written and make sure we don't have any conflicts with other ordinances, and know where to place it within the current commercial development ordinance so that we don't have any conflict.
I mean, I agree. Anybody else want to speak on this subject? I just had a quick question, Gary, and I don't want to drag this on, but I know in the past we run into a major problem with like sewer permitting of these snowball stands and that kind of preventing the project from moving forward. I mean,
So we're not asking, all we're asking to do, 'cause
I know
we're still-
here
we're
we're
still
not,
gonna-
but I
we're
mean-
still gonna require the base flood elevation, we're still gonna require elevation to get BFA, base flood's gonna have to be, BFE plus 1 on the floor of whatever the structure's gonna be. We're still gonna require that you get a permit for whatever culverts you have to place, whether, that one's gonna have to have a culvert on State Highway and a culvert on a Parish Road, OLA Highway 16. So they gotta get permits from 2 different individuals, to put the driveway in. They're still gotta contact the health department, and if there's no sewer, they're gonna have to, put a mechanical sewer treatment plant down. and all the permitting associated with it. So we're not asking that they just be able to roll the structure out there and plug it into an outlet and go to work. We're just requiring that there are some things that make little or no sense to require that expense in a traffic impact study, drainage impact study on those particular items.
Good stuff, Gary. Appreciate you. Anybody else? Don't want to move on? Anybody? All right, moving on. So do we want to take action? I mean, I'm good with putting that on the agenda for the next council meeting.
Well, let's.
You got that?
She's gonna write the ordinance, and then we're gonna meet next Wednesday. We're gonna meet next Wednesday anyway.
Wednesday?
Well, we're gonna meet next Wednesday next week. We got some conflicts on Tuesday, so
Okay.
we're gonna meet next Wednesday, and that's what my conversation with Mr. Girlinghouse was earlier in the week, so.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay, appreciate it. All right, other business. Let's talk about a temporary moratorium. Mr. Gerald McMorris had put forth this.
Good afternoon, guys. I guess first thing with the camera, look, a triad hat, brand spanking new, I want to give to Jeff Hart.
No, I'm not wearing that.
No.
Look, I took my MMR shirt off for you before I came here.
So just a little joke between, both work for electrical companies.
Real quick, before
So-
you, start talking, on when I got a text that said that we might not be able to waive the traffic impact study on the state highway part. Only the parish.
Okay.
So, you might want to look into that point. All right, now you can go back.
So just
on how
introduce
good
myself,
MMR is over Triad.
I'm Gerald McMorris with the Parish Council, serve District 6. So my proposal was to adopt a temporary moratorium for up to 12 months regarding the subdivision on property, and this definition therefore being located on the south side of Interstate 12 of the parish. All right, so we agreed we would come here every Wednesday until we got this resolved. So we wouldn't have to go into a big moratorium, like I explained to everybody the other night. What we're looking for answers to help the people. We looking to make it better for everybody that's involved, from the developers to the landowners to the homeowners to the traffic to the school to the fire departments. There's a lot of stuff being considered here with Randy's stuff, Jeff Ard's. So can we make it happen in 30 days? I doubt it. I don't think we'll have all the information we need in 30 days. So I'm hoping everybody will work with us to try to get this passed through. Does it have to be 6 months? No. Does it have to be 3 months? Can we do it in 3 months? I'm gonna go down through the list here and just tell you where we at right now on some of the stuff that we're working on. I left my copy at work, but Sandy brought me another one. Give me 1 second. Che, you'll never make it for 7:30. all right?
It's okay. It's okay.
That's Randy's. Lauren, you got yours together? It's all on mine. All right, so the first one we'll discuss is the density, right? Adjustments. I think we made a pretty good headway the other night, and we came in for 2. All right. Some people wanted 2.5 from the council on to the developers, and then the council decided to go with 2 per acre, right? So that was a big plus, right? All right. The next thing would be the road width. We introduced the 18 to 20 feet, right, Jeff?
Yep, 18 to 20.
That's been addressed. The flood zones. We all realize we live in a flood zone area. We have flood X, flood A, and AE, correct? So we got some studying to do on the A and AE zones. The X is no problem for the developers, but we have it for the other ones. All right, the wetlands, Randy's working on, the servitudes, and the easements. The easements is getting permission to go across people's property. If some of the stuff we're gonna put in place to be able to go do work on their property. All right? Any questions on that?
Right now.
All right, addressing subdivision construction specs. Consideration to be given to addressing off-site drainage through a subdivision by increasing the stormwater detention requirements. And I think Gary Talbert and engineers work together, and they come up with a 20% reduction already. Upstream and downstream impacts and site design. Upstream, downstream. That's what we need to know. Right now, we don't have anything that'll help the people that live here on the south side, going downstream or coming in from upstream. That's a big one we need to figure out. All right. Regional stormwater detention. All right. I can't see with her glasses. Make sure we understand the ratifications and possibilities of implementing this type of system. And stormwater detention is the ponds and stuff, right? And you guys are working on that now. All right. Introduce a field ordinance in flood AE and zone A that will allow a certain percentage of dirt to be filled to the base flood elevation. Now, if you people hear me, I didn't say X, because X does not require a big buildup, correct? We need to understand, if we're gonna build an X, how much do we have to build up? Is it a foot? Is it just fill in the low spots? Because there's spots down there by our house, is big valleys where the water runs off, right? How much dirt they gonna have to put in there to fill all that in? So, and I'm just looking right here by my house, nowhere else.
I think on that right there, we probably got some good legwork already done on that. 'Cause
All
we
right.
had a major discussion on this, about 4 years ago, Gary?
Yeah,
4 years ago?
It was just to address special hazard flood zones, which are AE and A zones.
All right. So just things we need to understand. All right, assessment of school board, district impact fees. And that means if you build in Frank Settlement, that money would go to Frank Settlement School to help them provide for the children, or Denham, or wherever. All right, we're working on that, and everybody needs to hear this. We are working on that issue with Joe Murphy and the school board right now. We got the senators involved, we have different people helping us. That's coming fast, so we can have that information. We all know, we're growing up in Frank Sullivan. We have zero capacity right now at Frank Sullivan High School. We got 42 people can go to elementary school. All right? What can we do to make sure our children are getting what we need? All right? That's not counting, I got a whole list made up. Grace Creek, all them little schools over that way, they feel, Jeff, you looked at the numbers with me, right? All right, so we're working on that. Assessment of fire department impact fees. Congratulations to District 4. Their tax passed. They're gonna get right at $4 million a year. All right?
3.5% of the voters showed up.
So just give you where we at. So I think everybody on the south side of the interstate, we pay a user fee, $32.50 a year, correct? Am I wrong with that number? $32.50 on our taxes that we pay, right? A user fee. That's not enough. That's not enough to help the fire department out to maintain the insurance rates that we have. All right, so we're working on that also. We met with a couple of fire departments already. All right? An assessment of sewer and water, that will not affect our side of the interstate. We're gonna scratch that off because the sewer and water is supplied by a personally owned company already, and that shouldn't have anything to do with the council and the water, sewer. We have open ditches south of the interstate, all right? All right, I'm ready. Let's go, guys. Anybody got any questions for me? Yeah, guys, I'm here to help you guys, the developers. I'm here to help the people. That's what I'm here for. And all you guys know with the big developments that we had hit our parish in the last few years, we need some help. Now we're coming to the south side. 4-H Club Road, we all know is getting built up big. Right on down to Frank Settlement, Marpaw, Springfield. I don't think they ever built anything in Coyell. They don't like us too much down there. All right, but
Sooner or later, they will.
yeah, sooner or later. But anyway, if you guys got any questions for me?
I like your drive, Gerald. So let me just ask you a question. Would you be willing to go with like a 90-day moratorium? If we got everything done, then we'll let it expire. We'll put some wording in there that we could extend it if we didn't meet the listed requirements. I mean, is there any flexibility there?
I don't think 90 days is gonna get us there. I really don't.
Okay,
Do you guys think, I'm asking developers tonight, I'm asking the developers also, look, they're a big plus for us also, all right? We want things in Spring Settlement, Coyell, we need tax dollars, right? It's coming, no matter if you want it or I want it. But if they're gonna work with us to get it smaller and get the lots a little bit bigger, right, the houses, that's what we need. We don't have anything to work with. Coyell Ballpark, y'all remember that, all right? We lost it because of that, all right? So would you guys help us decide what we got to do to push this thing on through so y'all can start building, all right?
so Gerald, can I make a couple comments?
Go ahead, sir.
Okay, A and B kind of got addressed. I think the majority of the concerns in A and B got addressed with the ordinance that was adopted Thursday night. I think a significant number. The regional stormwater detention is going to require a parish-wide drainage impact study that probably won't be done in a year, even if we put a year's moratorium on here. I don't think, because there's no funding within the budget right now. The administration to start off with would have to generate the ability for us to spend the money. They would have to, I mean, it's got to start there. It can't start here the way the home rule charter is written, unless we chose to put it in the budget as it was adopted in January of 2023. So what I'm saying is that a year's moratorium is not necessarily going to get you what you need for a regional stormwater detention plan. So I don't think that any moratorium is necessarily going to fix that particular issue. I think we need to work with the administration to generate an appropriation to go out and do a parish-wide drainage impact study and figure out where the problems, I mean, we know where the problems are, but what solutions there are to address certain problems. The fill ordinance thing is look, we've beat that around 2 or 3 times. I've been in support of a fill ordinance before. I'll be in support of a fill ordinance again. The question is, you got to get, I mean, last time it passed and it didn't pass, or I mean, so, you know, I mean, it's a matter of, we got to hammer out an ordinance. I'm not saying that that can be done in a matter of weeks if that's what we're looking for, a dirt fill ordinance.
So let's stop right there and just talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
I know it's a lot of people down home probably does not want that either. Because we're gonna tell people what they can do with their property, no doubt about it. But if we don't put something in place, when things like this come up in a flood zone area, go look on Buddy Ellis.
look,
It's gonna be built high as this room.
I agree,
Right?
I agree with you 100%.
My house.
Understand,
Gerald,
that's what's gonna happen, and the people need to understand this.
Well, Gerald,
All right.
I agree with you, but what I'm telling you is, you can't say that in a year, you're gonna get 5 people on this council to support that ordinance. I mean, or 6 or 7 to make it veto-proof. That's all I'm telling you. I'm not saying it doesn't need to be done, I'm talking about the moratorium versus the items you have listed.
Yeah,
The school board, so the assessment for a potential drainage impact fee, we've already talked about that. We were trying to implement that, and our attorney basically said, you've got no study for justification. So we're back to another deal that we need a study that talks about, what we need. We need to put a cost on it, then we need to generate a impact fee related to what that cost is. That's what Chris Moody told us the last time. We talked about it for 3 or 4
and
months.
which one is that?
A drainage impact fee.
That's the impact
So
fee.
we talked about it, we debated it, we tried to get an ordinance ready, and then when we're ready to introduce it, we're told, you can't legally do that because you don't have the justification to put an impact fee out. So, and that's gonna lead, so I'm just telling you, it can be done, it's just not gonna be something that's gonna be done within a 12-month moratorium. I mean, it can be done, but it's, to impose a 12-month moratorium and think that you're gonna have an end result after that deal is not necessarily the case, because it's gonna take a while to generate the appropriation, the study, and the justification for putting the impact fee.
So understand, if you come by my house, I got 362 acres right by my house. If they come up there and build in that section of the land, it's gonna kill us. It's gonna kill everybody in the community for us flooding, all right? How it works on 444, I have no clue, but I can tell you every canal, because I hunted all over that country.
Right.
Right? That's what we need. We need to understand up front before we go build something and just guessing on it. Are we doing it inside the boundaries? Is that the only thing we figure out? Can I ask Mr. Derrick a question? Do we just figure out what's inside the boundary? Or do we do where it goes and where it comes from?
We do both.
You do both.
Our ordinance have to look downstream, upstream.
How far?
It depends on each, like, we have some where we have a major channel running through us, so we have to look like a mile, half a mile upstream, downstream. If it's generating just my property, we gotta look at, there's different criteria for each one, we get report the water and come up with that stuff based on the ordinance.
So I'm trying to get support here, okay? So we're gonna go off of Jack Allen Road, where that canal comes across by Randall's there, all right? Goes into the property. Then it goes out 444. Then when you leave there, you go back around by Brent and Buffy's house. That's where the other canal goes to. So is that all the places that you go out and look? Because that's your main channel is going out. How far do you go from there? Do you go across 444 into the swamp?
One would probably go down to the small area, would probably go down.
How are you going to get it there? That's the question people are asking us. How are we going to get it there? We don't know. That's what the people don't know. If we have better education to the people.
Okay, but Gerald, and
Go ahead.
and I think that's where the disconnect is that nobody knows yet. That's what the drainage impact study. Well, wait a second, but that's what the drainage impact study is going to do. But this is the issue, and I'm gonna step forward a little bit, and I don't want to draw a bunch of rows. I'm trying to point something out. So Randy proposed doing a drainage impact study on the front end, right?
Yep.
Okay, before anything's approved, he needs a drainage impact study. Well, there's a couple flaws in that. Number one is that nobody's gonna commit to spending an ass pot load of money to figure out where the water's going, how we make it go there within the confines of what the discharge rates that the new ordinance requires. So we got to look at where the water's coming from, where the water's going. We've got to look at the design of the subdivision. We got to look at the current way the water sheets. We got to look at what that rate is. Then we got to plug the new development in. We got to look at how that's going to impact the water, and we've got to design to decrease those outfalls. I mean, that's what we got to do. You're going to spend a ton of money doing that. And Fort Tablada is working for the parish and for everybody that lives on 444 and Jack Allen and in that French settlement community to make sure that development is conforming to the ordinance and doesn't create a negative impact to the people that live around there and gets the water to where it needs to be. They're not going to build that subdivision until Fort Tablada says grace over the design, that quality. In this particular instance, we're talking about Valere, right? We're going to talk about Valere. That's what we're talking about. Because you brought they're not going to say grace over that development until they're satisfied that the design put forth for quality and the numbers that they generated on where the water comes from, where the water goes to, what the current outfall is, what the outfall is going to be after development, all falls within the confines of the ordinance. So you're right. Nobody knows now. And if we can't make it work, they're not going to build it. But what these guys are not going to do is spend an ass pot load of money without some understanding that if we make it work, we can build it. What you're not going to get anybody to do is spend the money on the front end and then come before the council and said, look, we've got this design. It meets your ordinance. It's going to work. There's no negative impact. Please approve my development. And so I think that's kind of where right now, nobody knows.
I got a question.
Nobody knows in theory how that development's going to impact. But let me tell you something. That development's not going to get built until the engineers that work for this parish are satisfied that the design put forth by quality is gonna meet the current ordinance and decrease outfall and protect the residents around there. It's that simple. I mean, and I think that's what we've tried to do on this council for the last 6 years, is to strengthen the ordinances to protect the citizens of this parish. And to be honest with you, we made a change a while back, and there's probably been 0 subdivisions built according to that ordinance because of the way, submittals and all that stuff work. We changed this ordinance to add strength to the way submittals were done, when the implementation of this ordinance will take effect, which the length of a drainage impact study and how additional development has to be considered, before something that's tentatively approved has to be can be added on to. And so, yeah, right now nobody knows. But what I'm telling you is to do a study on the front end, you're not going to get an in-depth study as you're getting after the fact. Because ultimately, you can ask some developers that are sitting out in that audience. They post that sign with that phone number on it, and they start getting phone calls. And I had a conversation with one about 3 weeks ago when we were talking about, when it was first mentioned about a drainage impact study prior to an approval. Acceptance of a submittal of a proposed subdivision. He said, I gather more information from people in the community calling me and identifying particular problems. This is a problem here. This is a problem here. When this type of rain event, this is what we go. And those guys that want to build a good product, and I'm gonna quantify, those guys that want to build a good product take all that information into account. And they implement that in a drainage impact study. And it's more than just what the sheet flow across the water is. They take into account what people tell them. For years, we've got this, like you can sit there, if they were building a subdivision by you know where the water moves all through there, right? You could give that engineer tremendous guidance on what's going on versus him just showing up, doing a little drainage impact study based on topo, and submit it and say, this is the numbers. And then, let me just tell you, I'm sitting up here, you give me a drainage impact study. You know what that means to me? You know what the drainage impact study means? That last paragraph, when the engineer tells me what that drainage impact study says. All that crap on the first 60 pages means nothing to me. That last page where the engineer breaks down what that drainage impact study means and what the impact of that drainage impact study, that's all I need to understand. So ultimately, for me to tell them they got to do it on the front end, or for you to say nobody knows where the water's going to go, that's true. But nobody's going to let that subdivision be built until we know where the water's going to go and how it's going to go and where it's going to go and how it's going to impact the people around it.
Appreciate you, Gary. Go ahead.
I appreciate
Gerald.
that. Just one more thing. So once we decide where it's going to go, I asked you this question the other night. How are we going to get it dug out? How are we going to get it cleaned out to the swamps? We don't know.
So let's
Okay,
talk
so-
about
right,
that real
okay,
quick.
so-
I got a
so-
question, Gary. So
Go ahead, Shane.
they got some engineers who develop subdivisions in the audience. I'd like to hear some of their opinion on how big a deal is it to put a game plan, to do a study, and submit that drainage study when you're submitting the preliminary plat. I'd like to hear, honestly, you know, how big a deal is that? I mean, can that be done or can it not be done? I mean, my thought is this, right? I mean, so you come up with the preliminary plat. Come on, raise your hand.
And I'm not an engineer, but I am a developer.
Well, come on up.
It was the next item.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so I'm gonna start, Lee Foster, 21108 Robertson Road. Lee Foster. So effectively, and I'm a developer. So our current process in Livingston Parish is we submit a preliminary plat. We've got rough calculations for detention pond sizes, traffic flows, or something very preliminary. We go to planning commission, approval, denial. If it's approved, we come to the council, it gets approved. That's the current process today. After that, then we submit drainage impact studies, traffic studies to the parish. Once that's approved, then we get what they call a preliminary 2. So that's our current process today. What's proposed in the ordinance is I come to the planning commission with all my studies. I have my layout, I have all my traffic studies, my drainage studies, I have all that in hand. I present to the planning commission and I ask for approval. If they approve it, I come to the council with the same thing. The part that's missing there, and it's done in other places, is all the information, all the studies that are required in school studies, traffic studies, drainage studies, fire district studies now, all that is based on a map that none of the public has seen, which that's what that first step is, preliminary 1. So now the school board has a map that is not in the public forum. The fire district has a map that's not in the public forum. So you have no, by requiring all the studies up front, and I'm for the studies up front, we have to do them anyway. But if you're gonna require them up front, at least allow that the planning commission can approve a tentative so we know what we're working with. We know how many lots. We know if it meets the ordinances. We have some guarantee that, hey, look, we've met the ordinances. Now we take step 2 before we come to the council. But for the public's perspective, for everybody out there, they don't know what we're working on, because when I get all those studies and I'm finished and I submit to you, I've met those requirements. Those options of changing, moving, tweaking are gone. So the preliminary 1 at planning commission, and then a preliminary 2 or tentative preliminary, how you want to call it, and have the studies before you come to the council is the proper way to allow the public input and local knowledge and then the engineering knowledge to be successful. But your thing is like, how hard is it to have that drainage impact study? It's not hard, but if I do it and it meets regulations, the time of input from the public is too late. So if I can get that tentative geometric design, that it meets the number of entrances, the width of the road, those questions that you have up front that we answer, then I can take that information and apply it to the studies and have a good overall product. That's the difference. It's the timing. So you introduce a step in the process without thinking about the consequences. So it cuts the public out of that information period that it's not public knowledge, it's social media. It's the fire district has it and they send it out. The school board has it and somebody sees it. I'd rather that come in a public forum through the planning commission where it's open to the public. They have the owner's name, they have the developer's name, they have the surveyor's name, and it's knowledge. Because I mean, this is what we do as an industry. This is what I wake up and do every day. Not, hey, what do we think it is? What do we think it may do? So that's the difference in the steps in the process, in my opinion. So I think it can be accomplished and have the studies before it comes here. It's called a preliminary 2 in the parish, but we need that step 1, preliminary 1 or tentative with the planning commission that says, hey, we meet the ordinances as proposed. Now let us go on to the next step and provide information. And now we have the contacts of Gerald in the community or whoever else is out there, the fire district, that's working on the same map, same information.
So my thought process on that, Lee, was to basically have the planning approve preliminary plat, like you said, basically it fits. You do the studies, the council would have final say.
Yeah, that'd be preliminary 2. So right now, that we'd go to
Then
planning.
you do all your studies, you do everything you're supposed to, we get the seal, the public gets the seal, then we approve.
Correct. So that would, we'd go to planning commission for preliminary 1. The public would see it. They would know what was proposed. We do the studies, and it would come to council with studies and plat for what the parish calls preliminary 2, which that is the process, I think, if we're going to change it.
Yeah,
should be.
so basically, it's the same process, except where we vote after preliminary 1, we're gonna vote after preliminary 2.
Yeah, that's my, I mean, that's not the way it's proposed, but that's
Yeah,
what,
but I mean, that definitely is, I mean, 'cause, you know, the public needs the input, and if you've done all those studies without the public input, you're not gonna do them again, is the issue.
correct.
Right, so I mean, I think that's why the public needs to know what the studies are being done on, which is why they need to know what's coming. Because let's be honest, the project on 444 was guiding the public before it was submitted, because the developer doing his due diligence asked a particular utility, do you service this area? And instead of him saying, no, we don't service it, and that being the end of it, he says, no, we don't service it, and they put out in the community what's coming when it wasn't even ready to go out in the community.
So that's my thought process. No, they're doing the studies up front is not a problem. It's doing it, what is it based on? What layout is it based on? What design is it based on? What criteria is it based on as far as, does that meet the ordinance?
So preliminary 1, planning commission, you listen to the people's concerns, go back, you do all the studies, and then preliminary 2, you come before the council.
Yeah, we
I
do
guess
those
for
steps now,
preliminary
just
2
we-
approval, I mean, if a study needed to be tweaked before approval, it could be tweaked, or, you know, if it would,
Well,
as
basically,
long as you meet the requirements of the ordinance, though, it's gonna be hard to be denied. I don't know if we've ever denied a development in Livingston since I've been a councilman, if it met all of the requirements of the ordinance. So, I mean,
Yeah, because-
it's almost impossible to do that.
it's a shame, because basically what's gonna happen is Morgan's gonna represent the parish and the constituents to
Right.
make sure that what the developer's bringing meets the ordinance and have, you know, the requirements set forth. So when preliminary 2 comes before the council, it's just a timing issue. It's just, we vote later instead of early. I mean, I got no issue with that.
That's my recommendation, and
I kinda like it. I appreciate you coming and putting forth that idea.
But Gerald, getting back, we kinda got sidetracked on.
You know, I wanted to mention something on that too, Gerald. The impact fees for drainage, you know, you remember when we talked about this 4 or 5 months ago, maybe it was a little bit longer than that, maybe 6 months ago, but we recognized the need to improve the drainage outside the subdivision, outside the development, you know, so that it wouldn't have a negative impact on the surrounding property owners, right? And we did kind of communicate with the attorneys, and they came back and said, well, how much are you going to charge? You know, that was the question. So then the question came up, well, it's kind of hard to determine how much you're going to charge on an impact fee when you have no money to actually maintain the drainage outside the development, you know. So a one-time, I guess you could say, fee to dig out a ditch and then not dig it out again for the next 30 years, you know. The study kind of was to include the amount of funding you have to maintain the drainage outside the development, and then, you know, you could come in and make some improvements to the drainage so that it would be easy to maintain with some drainage impact fees. The biggest, and I know everybody in this room is tired of hearing me say it, but the biggest problem that we have outside the funded gravity drainage districts is that we don't really have any dedicated funding to maintain the drainage. So, you know, it's kind of hard to decide how much drainage impact fee you need, because you could go dig it out, but then, you know, I don't know, 6 months later, hurricane comes, you don't have any funding to go clean it out and keep it maintained, you know. So that's a pretty big question. Now, my thought is just what Gary was saying, and basically you were saying, is we need some type of study that can help us come up with the data to decide, you know, where it's acceptable to put dirt and where it's not acceptable to put dirt, and should we build on pylons here and should we not, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. You know, should we have a upstream regional stormwater detention pond, and where should it be, and all this kind of stuff. We need like a parish-wide gravity drainage study or something. My thought is if we ever got Gravity Drainage District 8 funded, 80% of Livingston Parish, we could kind of put that whole thing together right there. Like you say, a lot of the questions we have, a lot of the fixes for the drainage problems in Livingston Parish ain't going to come until we fund that gravity drainage district. So
Gerald, you asked the question. Derek, you want to come up here and answer the question Gerald asked a while ago? Because you talked about where the water was going, and Gerald said, "How you going to get it there?" Talking about you talking about these canals. I don't know all the canals because I'm not from there, but you got these canals coming in and ditches coming in, coming out, going through the retention, and you say it's going to the swamp. And Gerald said, "How it's going to get there?" So let's talk about
Tell us the plan.
let's talk about construction plans and how you get that to the swamp. Let's talk about it.
So in this particular instance, what we would do is we would actually go do HECRAS models on the downstream side. We would look at what was there. Obviously, there's probably, if I had to guess, left over from the storm, probably got trees down and so forth, so we'd have to consider all of that. We'd, in this particular case as well, only got one piece that's in the floodplain. It's coming through, so there's two crossings under 444 with culverts and box culverts. That's going across into the swamp. So once it gets across there, we would actually model all that area, go in, and in this particular case, with the new drainage ordinance in place, we would actually reduce the amount of runoff going off that piece of property by 20% in a 100-year storm. We would over detain. We would actually have less water dumping. We would have less water dumping off our property than what it is today. The upstream of this, there's actually a slough coming through. Upstream of this, all that area off of Morales Lane actually drains. Some of that drains onto this piece of property. Some they have actually a ditch on that side. So when we say we haven't done a drainage impact study, we have in every project that anybody should do, but we actually look at the drainage, we look at the drainage patterns, we look at LIDAR, we look at where everything goes, we look at where it comes from, how it affects, how we, y'all have seen me at this podium numerous times. We talk about do not build up next to the property line, do not cut everybody off, make sure you got ditches, make sure you reroute, make sure you have all this kind of stuff. Been advocating for years to increase the drainage impact or increase the drainage ordinances of this parish to make sure that we protect the citizens around us. So we got to make sure that not only are we going to let less water out, we're going to, if we got to clean the culverts under DOT, start working with DOT if they allow us and go forth in order to do some maintenance on those culverts in order to make sure we have that. Are we going to go and clean out miles or channels? No, we don't have that in the budget. It's about trying to get the water. If the water is going off of us today, it's going to go off of us tomorrow. Where the time to do that was fund a drainage district, like we advocated for years and years and years to do that. It's about regional drainage. In this particular case, we're looking at a smaller region in order to get what's coming on to us and what's going off of us and how you can get it to where it needs to go. And that's what we're working on. So in this particular case, talking about floodplain, there's no lots in the floodplain. It's very minimal. Now, there's some drainage issues in there, but from a floodplain standpoint, no. But we actually check all that stuff. So.
Thank you for the information.
come on up, Scott.
Scott Lobel, 1852 Louisiana Highway 444. One of the main issues with drainage impact studies, whenever you're looking at them, is a study's done, and they're hired by the developer, and they start looking at that property within the bounds of the property boundary. And like he said, they'll look upstream and downstream a little bit, but one thing they're not taking into consideration, and when they do that, they go back to a watershed. Just as, for instance, there's information out there on the Ament River Basin. There's flood hydrographs. It tells you when that peak flow is. So Gray's Creek, a lot of laterals that are in our area will have that information on there. So you come in and to do a drainage impact study, and you look at that and you say, oh, we're either above, we're before it hits that peak flow, or we're behind it and things like that. But what's not happening is by the time that 6th or 7th or 8th development comes up in that area, these drainage impact studies, they're going back and they're looking at that same old hydrograph for that lateral, and they're not taking into account the 7 or 8 other subdivisions that's already came that maybe have rounded off that curve, and you got a lot longer peak flow for a longer time. It's not looking at that. Another thing that's changing in the engineering community, and one thing that alludes to it, like one ordinance that was proposed was designing ditches for a 10-year storm to a 25-year storm. And it's because we all feel something that something needs to be done with drainage, and what's happening is there's much more measured moisture in the air. That is a fact. United States Geological Survey is measuring more moisture in the air. So whenever we get rains, they're more intense. The duration of them is longer. They're more frequent because there's more moisture in the air. The engineering community is trying to catch up with all of these curves that you go to and look at and get this empirical data to go inside of these studies. It's all outdated. That stuff is 30 years ago. NOAA, which is the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration or Association or whatever it is, they're going back and updating all those curves and stuff for the region. That's things that are currently underway. So, and another thing that goes into account whenever you take it into these studies is, for instance, like, and it's germane to the subject matter, our parish leadership recently in Lower Livingston Parish, they dropped a lawsuit against Ascension Parish, and what Ascension Parish is doing is they're building levees around taking in more surface area, and they're also raising their existing levees to a higher base flood elevation because the flood maps are changing. And we dropped the lawsuit without a finding of significant impact or without any study or any data. And there's models out there that can be ran. Fort Nablata has a big one, and it takes 18 to 24 hours whenever you model a storm in it to spit out an answer for you. They had that information, but it gets dropped. So what the public is concerned are if parish leadership don't stand up for the guys from a drainage perspective from neighboring parishes, and then we continue to get developments and developments and developments, it puts us in a bad situation. So I shot the flood water in 2016 that showed up on my property to my house pad. My house was not there at the time. 4 years. 4 feet was what it was. So by the time we get several neighborhoods, and we settled with Ascension Parish for 2 relief bridges on LA 22 without any hydraulic information. Livingston Parish did not require any hydraulic information, but 2 relief bridges on LA 22 by the diversion canal. That was the cure. That's not a good solution. And then whenever we're going to have high density developments inside of our area, 50 years, that 4 foot may mean nothing to me at my house. And behind some other houses where there's some homes where this subdivision is going to drain into that flood area. I did the subdivision. It's Plantation Trace. So I think that's what needs to be looked at, and that's what needs to be taken into account. And whenever you increase lot sizes, you're building in a factor of safety. You're building in a factor of safety with traffic impacts for capacity because you got less, and then also with drainage because you're having more surface area that can drink up that water that lands on the ground. But these homes on 50 to 52 foot lots by 125, you multiply 50 by 120, that's 6,000 square foot. If it's a 3,000 square foot home, that's 50%, and then they're going to have the drive of impervious area. You're going to have the driveway, back patio, this, that, and the other. You put that home, you put a 100 by 100 home on an acre lot, that's 25% impervious area. So you're looking at, maybe 80 to 90% of an impervious area on a lot on these hyper micro small subdivisions. And if you do something nice and big, it's a significant deal, and it's kind of an unwritten calculation. And what they do is, for a drainage impact study, you go get a curve number, or you go get something that represents how much vegetation is in the ditch. This is all developed by empirical formulas. You can design about anything, and it takes good engineering judgment to make sure that you're grabbing the right numbers to go into the formulas to get the answer. It can be manipulated. And sometimes it is, because we continue to have development throughout the parish, and we still have drainage issues. due to those developments.
Okay, so, Mr. Lobel, so we, understanding that we used to design for 10, actually, I think, what was it, less than a 10% increase was the original, when we came into office, it was, you couldn't have more than 10% increase? So on a 10-year storm event, you could build a subdivision, as long as you didn't increase the outflow by more than 10%, that was successful. That was, when we came into office, that was ordinance. The ordinance now is a 20% reduction on a 10-year, 25-year, 100-year storm. We've taken into account the fact that the world is changing, and we're adjusting the numbers to do that. Look, when you talk about a half-acre lot, okay, so our ordinance, the way it was passed, doesn't restrict the size of the lot. But the size of the house and the size of the impervious material, the percentage is going to be the same whether you make that lot a half acre or whether you make the lot a quarter acre, because we're occupying the same amount of land.
No,
So
no, the impervious area
wait a
of the
second, on
lot.
100 acres, you got 200 lots, right? That's the way the ordinance is written. On a 100-acre development,
Okay.
you come up with 200 lots. So whether the lots are half acre or quarter acre, you still are gonna have the same amount of undeveloped land. Because on a half acre development, you're gonna have 200 lots throughout 100 acres. On quarter acre lots, you're gonna have 200 lots throughout 50 acres, and you're gonna have 50 acres untouched. So ultimately, you have the same amount of undeveloped land, whether you develop a half acre lot throughout 100 acres or whether you develop a quarter acre lot throughout 50 acres. You still have the same amount of undeveloped land. So there's no difference in the impact on the size of the lot as long as you restrict the density based on the acreage.
The difference in the impact is whenever you do those lots and you're gonna bring them up to base flood elevation or 1 foot above, like the ordinance requires, is because you all have a small lot and you're gonna put a house on it, pretty much the whole area gets filled up to 1 foot above base flood elevation. If you have a larger lot, it's just that house pad, and then the rest of everything is at a lower elevation.
So here's, so we talked about that. When we originally did the dirt field, we talked about how far the dirt pad had to go outside the foundation and then the slope to the sides. Basically, if you follow what the building code, you take a half acre lot, put a 3,000 square foot house on it, and then go 7 or 8 foot outside the foundation before you start sloping it off. There's not a lot of difference between the amount of dirt fill you put on a half acre lot versus whether you fill all the quarter acres up the same, because you're still gonna have 50 acres.
There absolutely is, and this is why, because you're gonna have a small lot, it's gonna be graded to drain. If you have a larger lot, it may not be graded perfectly. You also have room to have trees on that larger lot, which is gonna drink up a lot of water and take that out the equation.
So what about the 50 acres of natural land that never got touched? Does it not have any impact in the absorption of water?
It could if the drainage is routed through there, where it could sit in there and be consumed by the trees and stuff before it goes downstream and makes it to the outfall.
Okay, so-
It is a case-by-case specific by case, and I don't know that every design is gonna do that, or if the parish leadership is gonna require it to go through those 50 acres to where it can be consumed before it goes through an outfall process and hits downstream. Because one thing that you're doing, you're improving ditches. You're not, and the water gets where it's going faster. And
That's
what
why-
it needs is
that's
time
why-
to be,
that's what the
time to
retention
be
pond
soaked
does,
up
is
into the ground.
It slows the water down.
It could, what you're saying could work if you route it through that acreage. But we don't know if that's gonna be the case. We need help.
Well, look, this council for 6 years has constantly improved and improved and improved the ordinances that exist within this parish. When we came into office, there was as long as you were within 10%, you didn't increase more than 10% on a 10-year storm, they approved the subdivision.
And look, we appreciate everything that you guys are doing, but it's not enough at this point. It's not enough. We got a good start, but it's not enough.
Scott, I appreciate you coming and speaking. Don't walk away yet. I got a couple questions. So what are you proposing? What do you think would work? Just a general idea. What are you proposing? I mean, so let me ask you this. So say, for instance, you go and you zone the parish, and you have the classifications, and then within the classifications, you know, kind of like what Gerald talked about up here, it talks about the density within the classification. And then you go and you classify, you know, the area, I guess you could say, the way it should be classified. To me, that would kind of, the lot size, the minimal lot size is defined within the classification. So you could you could work with the councilman, you could work with the council, you know, with this zoning map, and we could go in and we could classify so that it did have minimum lot size, maybe 3/4 of an acre, maybe an acre, or certain areas, you know, maybe areas in flood zone A. I'm just throwing this out there. I haven't really thought about it, you know, but I mean, maybe in wetlands, you know, minimum lot size 3-4 acre. I don't know, you know. I mean, I don't know. What do you?
Zoning may be a partial answer if it can happen in time to give us some protections. But one thing I will say about zoning is other parishes have zoning, and it's not the complete answer to everything. Gotcha. It's also a good start, but it has its challenges as well. So one thing that I'm for and what I'm suggesting is ordinances that will support you guys. Will support you guys from developers bullying y'all or intimidating y'all with getting sued and things like that. If you guys are putting those things in place, then you have the protections. Because one thing that we're doing a lot of things at a rush. We're running some ordinances through. I know that Mr. Gary has been working on some things for 3 months, and we have some changes. But for instance, as an example, when an entrance touches a parish road, and we're going to improve that road to the nearest state road, what if that parish road has 2 outlets to state roads? Well, we're only going to go one way. But all we're doing is widening an existing roadway to 20 foot. We're improving safety. We're not improving capacity. Subdivisions bring capacity. Safety is needed, but capacity is needed as well, and more. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about safety, because people have been driving Jack Allen Road and they're not running off the road unless they're drunk. They've been, you know, we don't have many wrecks. We're going to widen the road, and we're still going to have a small amount of wrecks. But one thing that we may have is if you got 700 odd homes and everybody got 2 cars, you're going to have 1,400 cars coming out on that road. And they can drive it whether it's 18 foot or 20 foot. But what they're going to do is they're going to stack up at both intersections. One's going to be improved and one's not going to be improved. Then the next thing that's going to happen is the intersection down the street is going to fail, and it's already at a poor level of service during peak flow times. That traffic data is out there at DOTD. A roundabout, DOTD is behind the times. They need a roundabout at 444 and 16, and they need one at 42 and 16.
42 and 16 is coming. It's pretty quick. It's coming pretty quick.
Let me ask you another question, Scott. You heard what Mr. Lee was talking about the secondary preliminary plat and having the studies, you know, and it becoming before the council and
I kind of agree with him. I don't think it really makes a difference when it comes or whatever. When I was in development, we ran a drainage impact studies up there at the same time the preliminary plat was, you know, because we were looking at those calculations. I don't know if that really makes a significant impact on the development. I mean, they're looking at it, they're paying for it anyway.
The only thing I was thinking is that you would have the data, you would have it on the preliminary plat, you would have the study, you would know in advance more so what the intent of the development is and how it's going to be constructed. You'd have that visualization so that, you know, when people's concerns could be addressed, they could bring them forth and we could kind of talk through it, you know, before it was approved.
Well, for one thing, I think engineers are smart, so if you give them a set of criteria to design by, they're going to meet the criteria. So that's why I say, I don't know if it's of any consequence if the drainage impact study comes after preliminary plat. If you give me a criteria to design staircase to the moon, we could do it. They're gonna fit the bill, but we got to tell them what we want. They can do it. They're smart. I can do
it. Any other suggestions about how we could more so improve these ordinances so that so that it would better the quality of life? I mean, what are you seeing? I mean, what needs to be done here more so than what's being done?
I think we give the proper time it takes to look at all of these and go through a process where you vet and you come up with some real ordinances with substance that don't feel like they're quick and rushed just to maybe appease some things, because, you know, ordinances are being proposed, but they're not necessarily doing anything. For instance, the changing the definition of the FONSI. At the end of the day, I still don't know if we got any value out of that, because one thing, it feels like that we reduced a requirement, we took a set of eyes off of it, and then the other thing is, lost my train of thought. Oh, we're requiring them to do a certification, and somebody asked in that meeting the other night, if this engineer certifies as finding a no significant impact, can they be sued? Well, yes, but they can be sued over stamping that drainage impact study. That's also a certification. And if they say that there's a finding of no significant impact in there, you got another piece of paper that they're already doing. He's already certifying a drainage impact study. I certified him myself. But that limited liability, 5 years for an engineer. You're not suing him after 5 years. He's out of there. And I don't think that the engineering profession is really going to put something out there that's going to be so negligent that it's going to warrant getting sued. I don't know the last time an engineer been sued over drainage. I don't.
So does that mean they're doing it right?
That means that they are doing it right to the criteria what we have. What the public is asking you, Mr. Talbot, is to change the criteria. We don't want the small lots.
What do you want?
We want larger lots.
What do you want the criteria to be? I mean, I'm just telling we
something responsible.
What is define that? Define
that's
responsible.
What. Right, that's what the
moratorium. Wait a second.
That's what the moratorium needs to be put in place, because collectively everybody needs to come together and define what is responsible development. You know what responsible development is to me? You go look at Plantation Estates in South Denham Springs. That neighborhood is over 50 years old. It's beautiful. It has stood the test of time. The homes are beautiful. They're older. That's what development should aspire to be like. Not what we're getting with these 50 by 125 foot lots. That's not it. And I'm not going to go and name those neighborhoods that are like that, because I don't think that we should put that out there. But there's people that want responsible development. We're not against development. We want it done properly. We want it done responsible. We want it controlled. That's what we're asking you guys for. That's what all the public outcry. And I'm not necessarily always a proponent for moratorium, but it feels like that's what's needed at the time. And the reason I'm going to say that, because you guys as councilmen, there's 4 statements that have been made. 4 statements or actions. One action is, the other night the quorum was lost because you had other obligations. And I know you're a busy man, and I'm not faulting you for that. So what I'm saying is, but this is such an important issue that people need to come together, and we need to afford it the time that it requires so we can get good ordinances on the books. Another thing that was said by another councilman was that our subdivision ordinances are 20 years behind the times. That's a glaring red flag, man. It's time to catch up. A third one was, when the moratorium was proposed for the south side of the interstate, one councilman said, well, that's going to push all the development up there. It made it sound like he don't want the development to run up there to his end of the parish. So it sent the sentiment to me that there's a lot of need out there for wanting to get something on the place that has some teeth and some on the books, to have some teeth and some merit for us. And the other example that I was going to say that I don't, anyway, lost my train of thought, so here we go. The last thing is, Mr. Talbot had made the comment that the ordinances that he does have that aren't necessarily effective, in my personal opinion, or don't address all of the issues, they have questions, more work needs to be done, he's got a good start, is that it took him 3 months to get what he has on paper, which doesn't really give us a whole bunch just yet. It takes time to get good ordinances in place. That's why a moratorium is needed. So, that's all I gotta say.
Appreciate you, Scott. Really appreciate that, buddy. All right, go ahead. Go ahead, Gerald. I mean,
And by the way, he graduated from Prince Albert High School, all right?
maybe there's a lot of smart people in Prince Sullivan.
Huh?
Okay, so we'll try to wrap this up by 8. It's 20 minutes from now.
I tell you what, we're gonna work on this. It's not gonna take us tonight. We're not gonna settle anything.
Right.
We're gonna work on this. I'm dedicated to the people. I think everybody knows me. I'm gonna work hard to help the people, right?
Yep.
And I'm gonna help the developers. We're gonna help get them what they need to come to our side of the parish to give us good products, all right? So that's what our goal is, for everybody to be successful. We need them, they need us, and that's where I'm headed with all this, okay? Any more questions from you guys? I appreciate your time tonight. So I'm gonna end mine right now.
I think you did a good job. Appreciate you coming.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else got anything they want to add? I think I seen a hand behind you. You're kind of big. You was blocking it.
Sarah Ferris, 19241 Plantation Trace Drive. So you asked what other suggestions we had. You had a great one. Your suggestion to me back here a few weeks ago was to pass a moratorium until all the gravity drainage districts were fully funded. It's not a bad idea. I think at this stage of the game, since we have turned this conversation into a Valaire hearing and not a discussion of the moratorium or a discussion around Sweetwater or Deer Run, I think you're likely to get a lot more support for that at this stage of the game than you would have a year ago. So that's all I wanted to say. As far as drainage is concerned, we've talked about drainage now until we're blue in the face. We still haven't talked about schools. We still haven't talked about roads. We haven't talked about traffic. So those are all concerns that all of these people have that we haven't done anything for yet. So part of what we need to do, and I've told Mr. Talbot several times now, what has been passed in terms of drainage, I think is great. It took a lot of work, and I have no issue with that. There's more work to be done, and we don't have time to delay or to not get that work done while we have development bearing down on us. So that is why we are in favor of a moratorium, because we still have other work that needs to be done.
Appreciate that, Sarah. Anybody else? Anybody else? All right. Is that it? I ain't missing anybody, right? All right. You want to keep going, or you ready to call it a day? Okay, so, well,
No, Randy's not
we can
here,
run
so-
through here. Randy's not here, and it's unfortunate because.
I want to talk.
Go
Jared.
ahead. Go
I
ahead.
want to talk,
Jared.
Jared. Two more things. The school thing. You know, we talked about that, and it was just brought up. I think this council will do whatever school board wants to do. If the school board wants an impact fee, they just need to come to us and tell us what they want per lot. They've got the ability to do the calculations. I mean, they basically now, when they get a subdivision, they know how many kids, in theory, come out of that subdivision in that grade school. They know how many junior high kids are coming out. They know how many high school kids are coming out. They can look at the school districts or the schools affected by that subdivision and know how many classrooms they need. They know what a classroom costs them. I mean, they can take the number of lots and put a dollar figure on what that subdivision will cost them. All they have to do is do that, divide the number, and come to this council and ask us to pass an impact fee. And we will be glad to do that. We have asked them, we have sat down with them and said, tell us what you need. But they got to come to us and tell us. We can't say that, you know, Sweetwater needs 5 more classrooms or 10 more classrooms, and those cost X. I have no idea what it costs Livingston Parish School Board to build a classroom. I got no idea. So for me to try to impose an impact fee on a lot for the school system is ridiculous, because I don't have that knowledge. But we have told them, if you come to us, we'll pass it. They've been given that information. So to say that we haven't addressed schools, we have asked them, what do you need? The ball's clearly in their court. They got to bring us a number. If they bring us a number, I have a feeling it's going to pass 9-0. That's my gut feeling. The same thing with the fire departments. The fire departments they know what they need. There's no need for me to tell them what a lot costs them. I have no idea. They've got to come to us and say what they need. We'll be glad to do it. I can promise you that. But they've got to do it. The ball's in their court again. So to say that we hadn't done anything isn't exactly fair to this council. We will do whatever those individuals ask us to do. And we've sent word that we will do whatever they've asked us to do.
Appreciate that, Gary. So just running through some of the stuff that was on the agenda. This is 5B, required studies and statistical data by Randy Delat. I was just reading through his ordinance. He talks about fire protection review, school impact study, traffic impact study, drainage impact study. We're going to continue to work on that. I think there's a lot of good stuff that can be implemented here. We kind of talked a little bit about it tonight, how to do it. I think that needs to be discussed more so, figure out how we do it. Gary just talked about the school impact studies. All this stuff is coming. It's just how, when, where, how much, all this kind of stuff is still yet to be decided.
Billy, under our current ordinance, on the 18th day of the month prior to the planning commission meeting, when the preliminary site plan is sent to the planning commission, is the traffic impact study and school impact study supposed to accompany those under the current ordinance now as it exists?
It was a long time ago, then it became after the preliminary plat. I'm not sure what it currently says. It's been changed a lot in the last couple of years. Got a lot of changes.
I mean, it says that they can be waived by the planning commission if they choose, but I mean by the planning director. But ultimately, in lieu of a school impact study, a 1-page description of preliminary plat to the school board will suffice in this, according to the current ordinance. I'm just saying that some of these things that propose this ordinance are already on the books that are done now.
The 18th of the month we submit to the planning director, but we also submit to the school board. Every utility that's involved, every drainage district, fire district, sewer district, every district that's involved in that subdivision, we are required to submit a plat to them to get their comments.
And let me ask you another question. While we're talking about that, there was a deal earlier about waiving the traffic impact study. Sometimes DOT, all they're looking for is when you make the application for a permit, for a driveway permit, they don't even require a study. I mean, basically the parish doesn't require it. We could say we don't want it. When that owner goes to get that driveway permit, like on that particular deal, DOT sometimes requires a study, sometimes they don't. It just depends on, what the nature of the business is or what the nature of, the subdivision is. All I'm telling you is that some of this stuff is outside our purview, but it's, you go apply for a permit at a snowball stand, DOT probably just gonna issue that permit and not require a study.
They do not require drainage impact studies for residential driveways. Commercial developments, they do require it, and what they want to see is that the pre-development watershed does not
Traffic, we're talking about traffic.
Well, traffic too, they look at.
So if I go ask for a permit on Highway 16 at my snowball stand, are they gonna require me to do a traffic impact study, or is my application probably gonna suffice?
So I would think for a snowball, and I can't answer in that capacity, but I think that they would probably waive a drainage impact study if it's not a permanent structure, and they would probably also waive a traffic impact study so long as it wasn't near a major intersection.
Now,
So just, anybody else want to speak? I was just looking at, we talked about 5B. 5C, he's got some good stuff in here. I guess we need to talk about what currently is in the ordinance. when it comes to fire protection review. I mean, I know that we've made some changes in the past where fire protection chiefs review the plans and communicate, coordinate with the planning group to ensure that, I mean, they know the development's coming, they're looking at the structures being built and this type of stuff. So, I mean, I don't know, maybe it needs some more enhancement, but I don't know, I guess we need to talk about that some more. Does anybody have anything they'd like to input there? I mean, it's a little difficult without Randy here to get the intent there, but I just,
The current ordinance says adequate flow, capacity, and pressure has to be proven for the fire district. So we just took that out of the ordinance and created a new section for a more in-depth fire protection.
okay. So, go ahead,
He's
Jeff.
asking for impact fee for adequate flow.
Well, no, he's saying the owner of, go ahead, Lauren.
He said the owner of any new development shall provide a letter of adequate flow, capacity, and pressure for fire protection from the applicable fire district. And then B is if adequate flow, so they have to prove that. If adequate flow, capacity, and pressure cannot be determined, a letter shall be submitted stating that there is a failing level of service and shall be accompanied by a plan for fire protection signed by the applicable fire district. So what he's saying is if there's not adequate flow, then the fire district has to say there's not adequate flow for pressure capacity.
And then if you just, okay, so
go ahead.
typically, one way to solve water issues, if the water company, like Ward 2's example, they're, under their charter, they're not required to provide fire protection. So the alternative is these subdivisions to go in and the developers want to put in dry hydrants. The fire districts don't want dry hydrants. And if you go look at the code, the way it's set up, the responsible agency, being that particular fire district, has say over what the design standard is. So what we've talked about, and we're gonna actually write an ordinance, because instead of, in lieu of, and the fire department is supposed to be working on this, because in lieu of letting every design standard be different, we're trying to come up with one standard thing. What we're talking about is putting pumps in the submersible, in the retention ponds with a separate water system. So currently, as you have right now, you got fire hydrants on Ward 2 waters deal. And you using those fire hydrants to flush and to provide service. What you would ultimately do is you could scale back the size of the pipe for the water district, put flush valves on them in lieu of fire hydrants, and then run a fire hydrant system off the retention pond with a pump out there that basically, you know, maintained a certain pressure, level of pressure at a certain volume, and then it had a switch on it. When you open the fire hydrant, the pressure would drop, the pump would come on. The argument seems to be who is responsible for the maintenance of the pump. I mean, that's where we're at right now. Is that the fire department doesn't want to be responsible for the pump. So I mean, that's the issue. But there is an alternative for the fire department. There is alternative for how to go about solving those issues when we don't have, you know, enough pressure within the subdivisions. And we've talked about that. We're just trying to, they're supposed to be bringing us some more information on design standards within subdivisions on how we're going to write this ordinance, so that we're not haphazardly, one particular subdivision's got one design and one particular subdivision has another. We're going to look at a standardized design thing throughout the parish with respect to retention ponds, because that's where the water supply source is going to come from. You know what I mean? That's the one place, other than putting a container, like a tank out there full of water. I mean, that the retention pond seems to be the most logical place for that water to come through from on that particular situation.
So far as I guess you could say the wording in this ordinance, the modifications he's requesting, I mean, seems positive.
Level of service, you have to require a letter with a plan of action on how you're going
Okay,
to
so, and I got no issue with
Like
that,
that.
but are we gonna require that letter everywhere? I mean, so what Randy's addressing is a failing level of service in a subdivision. I mean, what we talked about the other day was that, like, fire protection district, was it 8? The guy was there, that I don't know who was there. They talked about they don't run water shuttles anymore. They list the equipment and by computer generated model, they talk about how much water they can shuttle. And that number is then turned over to the fire rating agency, and that number is used to calculate, whether you're a 4, 5, 6, whatever. However, they don't want to utilize a water shuttle number in a subdivision. They want to say that a subdivision has to have a fire hydrant capable of hooking to and putting a fire out. Yet the same standard that exists in a subdivision doesn't necessarily exist at your house if you live on a rural road. If there's a fire hydrant by your house, they don't want that fire hydrant to have to meet the same standard that a fire hydrant meets in a subdivision. And so that's the conflict as a parish councilman sitting up here and saying that we're looking for a particular standard in a subdivision that we don't want to require throughout the rest of the parish. And that's the conundrum. That's the problem, is that we had a guy sitting on Ward 2 water that said, okay, you want the fire hydrants within the subdivision to not go below 20 PSI and maintain 750 gallons a minute. Is that what the level that they were looking for? Yet the law says that it can't go below 500 because if a fire hydrant, or we can't go below 250 because a fire hydrant goes below 250, it's not even supposed to be installed. I think it's 250, 500, I don't remember the number. But ultimately, he said that fire hydrant in my front yard will not meet the standard that you're requiring for all the fire hydrants in a subdivision as it exists right now. So the question is, we're going to get to you. The question is, what standard are we going to create? And are we going to create the standard parish-wide so that every lot that's developed has to have the ability to show that the fire hydrant servicing them meets that standard? The same standards is required within the subdivision? And if we're not going to allow a water shuttle in the subdivision, are we going to allow a water shuttle to put out a fire in a rural area? I mean, you know what I'm saying? There seems to be, you got to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges, and you can't require one type of system in one area and have one standard in another area require another standard.
Come on up, Scott.
You absolutely can require different standard because the rest of the parish, the houses are not 7 foot from the eave to the other eave of the house. So when you have a neighborhood that's going to have houses jammed in like that, you best offer the best safety that you can for the health and the public welfare. And when one house is on fire and he's that close proximity to the next house, then it better be the best it can be. And that may not look like what it is for my house that's on 12.5 acres, and I'm not going to burn my neighbor's house down. So it really doesn't matter. It's going to be a loss for me if my house catches on fire. But I'm not going to burn my neighbors down because we 7 foot and my old lady left us eggs on and burned the house down with the grease.
That's a good valid point. Appreciate that. All right. Moving on, 5D, street entrances. I didn't get to communicate with Randy before. Does anybody have more information? Lauren, are you familiar with the changes, modifications he's proposing here?
Yeah, just any development consisting over 100 or more lots, shall route their entrances and exits of developments onto state roads and or highways.
So Ms. White, if you have land that doesn't touch a state highway, could that mean you can only have a subdivision of 100 lots or lower?
Cannot speak for Mr. Rainey.
Okay.
Anybody got a comment on this?
It's not specific about that, but there's 3 entrance ordinances or road ordinances that are coming up at that same meeting. So you got Mr. Ard with the 18 and 20 foot, which is very straightforward, very understandable. Then you got Mr. Girlinghouse's with the entrances, number of entrances, number of lots, and the distance apart. Then you got Mr. Randy's. If you adopt all 3, they conflict between the lots, the widths, the state road, parish road. So just look at that from that perspective. So I think some are straightforward and very understandable, and other ones may be in conflict, the ones that get introduced and passed.
So what'll happen is whichever ones get adopted, or if all 3 of them get adopted, we'll just immediately have to go in and change it before the very last one gets adopted. So the very last one will be adopted as amended with all the changes.
Okay.
Okay, moving forward. E, wetland regulations, 5E. I really, we're gonna need to talk about this in the future. I need to study this a little bit more. I think we talked the other night. Basically, what Randy's proposing here is total acreage of proposed development shall include wetlands previously mitigated or wetlands intended for future mitigation. The reason I say I need to do more research is there's an argument that wetlands could be mitigated before the subdivision ever was intended, and therefore it would not be wetlands. I got to look into, that's not something that's just kind of easily understood, in my opinion. Gonna need to look into that a little bit more. Any wetlands that meet the requirements for mitigation shall be in the initial design of the proposed development. Once again, I mean, to me, if somebody here can help me out, I mean, to me, the wetlands that meet the requirements for mitigation shall be in the initial design of the proposed development. They are. I mean, am I wrong about that, anybody? They're already in,
I think the gist
they're in
of
the
it-
initial design. They have to be in the initial
As I
design.
understand our discussion we had the other night, is if I've got 100 acres, I get 200 lots, right? By the way our current ordinance was written, 100
Yeah.
acres, I get 200 lots. I think, this is what I understood in my discussion with Randy the other night on the introduction. If I've got 100 acres and 30 of it are wet, then we only get to count 70, which means I only get 140 lots. That's how I understood as he was explaining the ordinance, which is kind of irrelevant because the density of 2 is based on a total number of acres. And if we go start excluding land, then the solution to that is to modify the density. I mean, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But the one thing about it is that when is something wet? Is it wet at the time you get? I mean, technically, we don't have wetlands to get a delineation. Am I right, or a determination? And then after you mitigate it, it's not wet anymore. So at who's going to determine? When's the parish going to determine it was wet? I mean, because technically nothing's wet till the Corps says it's wet, and then after I mitigate it out, it's not wet anymore. So I'm not sure that the ordinance seems to be confusing to me. So.
Yep, excuse me. So, number 3 on there, he's got the total number of buildable lots in a development shall not exceed the density requirement for the total acreage in the development that has not been deemed wetlands by the U.S. Corps of Engineers. I think I understand that one. What he's trying to say there is that, when you're talking about density requirements, you're only going to be able to calculate the density based off of the land that's not considered wetlands by the Corps of Engineers. So once again, I'm going to need to think about that one some more. And then the last requirement, number 4, he's got the total number of lots in the proposed development shall not exceed the density requirement for the total acreage of the non-wetland area. I'm thinking that's almost exactly what number 3 is, unless I'm confused, and I could be.
It was supposed to be 3, like the wording, he was supposed to choose between 3 or 4.
Right, that's a
But we have
duplicate
3
statement
and 4,
there.
which are the same thing.
Right. So we're going to talk more in detail about that and get some better understanding. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So number 3 says the total number of buildable lots in a development shall not exceed the density requirement for the total acreage in the development that has not been deemed wetlands by the U.S. Corps of Engineers. I think what he means there is that when you're trying to determine, we voted in the 2.0 lots per acre, that the 2.0 lots per acre should be calculated based on non-wetlands property and not wetlands property. And that's just the way I'm interpreting this. If anybody can help me there, I'd appreciate that. And then number 4 says the total number of lots in the proposed development shall not exceed the density requirement for the total acreage of the non-wetland area. To me, number 3 and 4 are the same there. So we're gonna work on that some more. There's a good suggestions. We'll talk about that some more in the future, see how we want to move forward with that. F, let's talk about F. We'll go, I think we can wrap all this up. I know a lot of people are starting to, get tired here, ready to go, but basically F is, currently in the past, and Gary probably can talk a little bit more about this, maybe some of the developers in here, but, we've got in here and throughout all our ordinances that the owner, we've got ODS, you've got some slash marks between them, but basically, owner, developer, surveyor, right? It's all three, right? Randy's wanting to make a change and it just say owner, right? A lot of times, owner. I guess I need to read this a little bit more, but a lot of times, owner hires developer slash surveyor slash developer to, I guess you could say, design, develop, and communicate, coordinate, permit, the whole 9 yards. And so, I think that's acceptable myself to do it like we're doing it, but I don't know, I might not understand.
I don't want to put words in Randy's mouth. I read this ordinance, and this is what it tells me. That typically, a lot of developers get options on a piece of property. They go get option on 500 acres of land. But they don't, they have a period of time to do due diligence and do their closing or whatever. Typically, what they do is they hire an engineer, they design the subdivision, the submittals are made to the council. Made to the planning commission, made to the council. After the submittals are accepted, they close on the land.
Right.
And so there's a feeling that if you change it to owners, that you're going to take a whole group of development out of the equation. People aren't going to necessarily go buy land unless they know they can develop it. And so the option thing, if you wouldn't work under those scenarios. However, there's tons. You create an LLC, give the developer a piece of it. I mean, there's ways to get around that particular deal. Ultimately, most parishes, all they require is that the owner acknowledges that their piece of property is being considered for development. They just acknowledge that nobody's just grabbed that piece of property and going through all these rigmaroles. They basically acknowledge that they're aware that their property is done, and that's, I think, isn't that what's done in EBR requires that you don't have to own the property. The owner just has to sign off and says that we're aware that the developer is moving forward with our piece of property for development. And so ultimately, the only reason to make the owner, to change ODS to owner, is to eliminate a developer securing an option on a piece of property and trying to get approval before buying it. That's the only purpose for that requirement.
And I can add this.
Go ahead.
I got a good friend of mine as a councilman in the session, and I talked to him. They had this same issue. They got ways around it. And I'm not going to say how they do it because I'm not going to help the developers. They're going to figure that out on their own. But there's a way that they can still make it happen. So really, this does no good. They can still get around it. It's one of them things, we can put it in play, got a way around it, it's still gonna happen what's going on right now. So it's kind of a waste of time. So I don't care if we do it or we don't do it, it's still gonna happen the way it's happening right now. And that's just coming from our neighbors that's already fought this battle. So.
Okay, appreciate that. Have to look into this a little bit more. Anybody else want to comment? Come on up, Lee.
I do think it'd be good to add owner acknowledgement, because I've had stuff done to my property that I didn't know about. So changing the definition of ODS to owner is, I don't think, proper, because a lot of things are done by a subdivider developer. As long as the owner acknowledges it. It really goes back to the standards talking about the parish versus the development community or the public. So when DOTD does a road widening, do they go buy the property first before they do their design, studies, and right-of-ways? No, they do their design, do their studies, and then acquire the right-of-way. But the owner acknowledges that they're working on it. So to me, I think part of the ordinance would be, it would stay ODS, but it would be added that the owner acknowledgement would be part of the submittals, where you have the developer's information, you have the engineer's information, and now you have the owner's information that acknowledges that somebody's doing work on that property.
Appreciate that. Come on up, buddy, and state your name and address.
Tommy Vandal, JBW Properties, and that, just to reiterate what he said, I think that's a good thing on that owner. But you run into a situation where if you got to get the owner to acknowledge it, you may be buying a tract of property that has 20, 25 owners on it. So we're going to have to go back and chase down all 25 people to get them to sign on there as acknowledgement that they're letting something be done with their property? That's something to take into
Well,
consideration.
typically, if you've made contact with 25 people, there's somebody that's got power of attorney that's executing for all those guys.
Not always.
I understand,
Yeah,
not always.
Not
but
always. But that's
typically.
just something I wanted to
I hear
bring
you.
into consideration.
Appreciate that.
Let's talk about G.
Good
I want
point.
to talk about G real quick.
Okay, so Gary wants to talk about G. I thought we'd already covered this, but
Really, I want
this
y'all-
is school
I
impact
want you to look
study.
At, I want you to look at G. I want you to look at the ordinance that was introduced. That we introduced this ordinance for vote, for public discussion in 2 weeks. Go to the last page and read what it says. Section 125-20.2, school impact study. It says in big red letters, waiting on information on study from school board or planning. I never received the information or a call back on the information contained in the calculations, so this ordinance is incomplete. We introduced the ordinance that basically says it does nothing because it has no information in it. I mean, we're supposed to introduce ordinances that have all the writing done, and this was the ordinance proposed that was introduced. And so that ordinance technically doesn't exist, so it wasn't introduced. So I just want to make sure that we're all aware of what got introduced last Thursday night without being vetted at the ordinance committee meeting.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate here, all right?
appreciate it. Come on up.
Hi, Gerald McMorris, I sit on the parish council. So, it does say that on the bottom. but we
Oh,
don't-
it says it in the ordinance.
In the ordinance. So the ladies that work for us actually typed that in for us, right? So, Chair, you seen it at that time? So, whenever it got sent out to us, it was in there.
I think we're just going to probably need to defer it until we get all the data in there.
So hopefully we'll have that answer by next week, and we can move on with it. All right?
Maybe so.
And that's for Randy Delat.
All right, thank you. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Anybody else? All right, we got a motion on the floor to adjourn. Is there a second? There's a second. All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Y'all oppose?
I oppose this act